The sun had barely risen over Manila when the streets of Tondo began to stir with life. Vendors pushed their wooden carts over cracked pavement, calling out Taho and Balut. Children ran barefoot, chasing each other through the narrow alleys, laughing despite the weight of the morning heat. Jeepneys painted in neon colors rumbled past like metal beasts, coughing smoke into the humid air. In the middle of this chaotic symphony, where poverty and vibrancy danced together, lived a boy named Marco Dela Cruz. Marco's home was a small shanty tucked behind a row of sari-sari stores. The walls were patchworks of recycled plywood and rusted metal sheets, patched so many times over the years that they no longer remembered their original form. When it rained, droplets found their way through tiny holes in the roof and tapped gently onto the floor. But to Marco, this place wasn't broken. It was home, his world, his beginning. His father, Lido, worked long, grueling hours at the port unloading shipments under the blazing sun. Some days he came home with fresh bruises, other days with nothing more than a few bills folded in his pocket. Yet he always greeted Marco with a tired smile and a playful tap on the shoulder. His mother, Aling Rosa, sold homemade kakanin, sticky rice treats, by the roadside. She didn't earn much, but she always set aside a piece for Marco, saying, "Para sa'yo, anak, my little singer needs energy," because from the moment Marco could talk, he could sing. It started with humming. Soft little melodies when he was alone, humming while helping his mother wash clothes, humming when fear or hunger made his chest tighten. When he was 6, one of the neighbors gave him a tiny broken radio they were planning to throw away. Its antenna was bent, the volume knob missing, and sometimes the sound faded into static, but to Marco it was treasure, his doorway to a world he didn't know existed. He listened to everything: English songs, Filipino ballads, old classics his parents didn't even recognize. He didn't know who Elvis or Sinatra were, but he felt something in their voices, a kind of ache, a longing, a fire. He copied them, voice cracking, breath slipping, but he never stopped. Every note felt like a thread pulling him towards something big, something far from the streets he knew. At night, when the electricity went out, which it often did, the neighborhood kids gathered around him. Someone would hold a cheap flashlight over his head as a spotlight, and Marco would stand on a plastic stool, one foot wobbling, and perform. His voice echoed through the cramped alleys, making people pause mid-step, making tired workers forget their worries for a moment. There was one night Marco would never forget. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that turns streets into rivers. His father had not come home yet. His mother was sitting quietly by the doorway, staring out into the storm with worry etched into her face. Sensing her fear, Marco began to sing, softly at first, then with more courage. The song was an old Filipino lullaby, one his mother used to sing to him when he was little. And through the rain, Lido appeared, drenched but smiling. He said, "Your voice led me home, anak." Marco held on to those words. But life was not easy. School was a challenge. He wore the same faded uniform for years, washing it every night so it would be ready by morning. Kids teased him because he had no proper shoes, only worn-out slippers that slapped loudly as he walked. But the moment a teacher asked for volunteers to sing, Marco's hand shot up. It didn't matter if he had holes in his socks. When he sang, he felt whole. Yet the biggest turning point came unexpectedly. One scorching afternoon, Marco was standing near a convenience store singing to himself, practicing a song he heard on the radio. A powerful, emotional ballad he didn't fully understand but felt deeply. A foreign tourist walking by slowed down, pulled out her phone, and recorded him. Marco blushed and tried to stop, but she encouraged him, saying, "You have a beautiful voice. Keep going." He did. A few days later, everything changed. The video she took, the barefoot boy singing with a cracked but soulful voice, began spreading online. First among locals, then across the Philippines, then unbelievably, internationally. Comments poured in. "Who is this kid? How is he not on TV yet? Give him a chance. This boy deserves the world." Marco had no internet at home, so he didn't even know what was happening until his mother woke him up one morning with tears in her eyes. "Marco, anak, look." They borrowed a neighbor's phone. On the screen was Marco's face, singing under the Manila sun, with millions of views. Marco stared at the tiny screen, heart pounding, unable to understand how his voice, just something he used to comfort himself, had reached ears he could only dream of. Then came the message that made his mother scream in disbelief. America's Got Talent wanted him to audition. Marco sat frozen. He thought it was a mistake, a prank, a dream he would wake from. But it was real. His father wrapped an arm around him and whispered, "This is your chance, Anak. This is the door you've been singing toward all your life." That night, Marco lay on the floor, staring up at the patched ceiling. For the first time, the world beyond Manila didn't feel so far away. For the first time, he let himself imagine a stage bigger than any alley, a crowd louder than any neighborhood. For the first time, he dared to believe he wasn't just a boy from the streets. He was someone with a voice powerful enough to break through them. The doors behind the America's Got Talent stage were massive, taller than any building Marco had ever stood close to back in Manila. As they slowly opened, bright white light spilled through the gap, outlining his small silhouette. Marco clutched the microphone so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. His hands trembled, not from the cold air of the studio, but from fear and hope. He could hear the faint roar of the audience on the other side. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people waiting for the next act. In Manila, the biggest crowd he had ever sung for was maybe 15 neighbors gathered around a dim alleyway. This was different, bigger, terrifying. A producer placed a gentle hand on Marco's shoulder. "Ready?" she asked softly. Marco nodded, even though he wasn't. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to escape his chest. He glanced behind him. His mother, Rosa, stood near the backstage curtains, pressing her hands to her lips in prayer. His father, wearing a borrowed jacket a size too big, gave him a small nod of encouragement. "Anak, remember," his father mouthed. "Just sing from your heart." Marco took a breath deep enough to steady the shaking in his legs. Then he stepped forward. The moment he walked onto the stage, the world exploded into color. The lights overhead were blinding, bright beams that swept across the stage like golden arrows. The massive AGT logo glowed behind him, so large it felt like a mountain. The audience murmured at the sight of him, a skinny, shy boy with neatly combed hair, wearing simple clothes and gripping the microphone like it might disappear if he loosened his hand. Marco stared at the judges' table. He recognized every face. Heidi Klum, smiling warmly, her chin resting on her hand. Sofia Vergara, eyes bright with interest. Howie Mandel, leaning in curiously. And then, Simon Cowell. Simon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyebrows slightly raised. His expression wasn't mean, it was analytical, curious. Marco had seen this look on television many times, and it always made contestants shake. Now he understood why. Simon was studying him, judging him before he even opened his mouth. Marco swallowed hard. Simon clicked his pen, then spoke into his microphone. "Hello there. What's your name?" Marco's voice was small, cracking. Marco Dela Cruz." A few people in the audience chuckled at his sudden "po," a polite habit he couldn't break, even here. Simon smirked, amused. "And how old are you, Marco?" Simon asked. "I'm 12. Where are you from?" "I'm from Manila, in the Philippines," the audience murmured again, some excited, some curious. Sofia whispered, "So cute," under her breath. Simon nodded slowly. "And why did you come here today?" Marco gripped the microphone tighter. His throat tightened. His heart hammered so loud he could barely hear his own breath. I want to sing for my family," he finally said. And for the kids back home who don't get many chances." The theater went quiet. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Simon's expression softened. "Just a little." "Well," Simon said, "we're glad you're here. What are you going to sing for us?" Marco took a shaky breath. "A song that reminds me of home." Simon nodded. "Whenever you're ready." Marco closed his eyes. For a moment the world shrank. The AGT stage disappeared. The lights, the cameras, the judges, they all faded. He imagined the narrow alleys of Manila, the echo of jeepneys, the laughter of the neighborhood kids. He imagined his mother gently humming at night, his father telling him stories by candlelight when the electricity went out. He imagined singing in the rain. Then the music began. A single, soft piano note drifted into the air. Marco lifted his head and opened his eyes. They glistened with emotion. He parted his lips and sang the first verse. His voice was gentle, shy at first, trembling like a candle flame in the wind. But as he continued, something shifted. The shakiness melted into warmth. The warmth grew into strength. His voice rose, carrying every hardship he had lived through, every dream he was afraid to speak aloud. Every note was full of his childhood. Hungry nights, rainy afternoons, laughter, fear, hope. The audience leaned forward. Howie's eyebrows rose. Sofia's mouth opened slightly, stunned. Heidi placed her hand over her heart. But Simon watched with a quiet intensity. His eyes narrowed, not in critique but in astonishment. He leaned closer, elbows on the table. Marco hit the chorus. The note soared, bigger, braver than anyone expected. It wasn't Polis. Head. It wasn't perfect. It was real, raw, human. It cracked with emotion, then strengthened, then cracked again. But that only made it more powerful. The crowd began to rise, row by row, chair by chair, a standing ovation, before he even finished. Marco didn't see it at first. His eyes were fixed upward, forcing the tears back, forcing himself to stay strong. His hands trembled around the microphone. His breath came out in gasps between lines. But he kept singing. If he stopped, he knew he'd break down. When he finally reached the last line, it came out as a whisper, a trembling, emotional whisper that echoed through the silent hall. Then came the roar. The audience erupted. Marco flinched at the sudden wave of cheers, applause, whistles, screams. He looked up, startled, almost confused. Were they cheering for him? His knees wobbled. Heidi stood. Sofia, too. Howie clapped above his head. But Marco's eyes searched for one person. Simon. The judge was still seated, but his expression had changed completely. His arms were no longer crossed. His mouth was no longer neutral. His eyes were glowing. He looked almost emotional. Marco's chest tightened. Then, Simon stood up. The audience exploded again. People screamed. Some even jumped from their seats. Marco put a hand over his mouth, overwhelmed. He didn't know what Simon's standing meant. He didn't know what was coming next. But the look on Simon's face told him something life-changing was about to happen. For a few seconds, the world seemed to freeze around Marco. The lights, the cheers, the towering stage, everything blurred into a hazy cloud of sound and brightness. All he could hear was his own breathing, ragged and shaky, echoing inside his chest like a frightened heartbeat. Golden confetti had not yet fallen, but in his imagination, it already sparkled above him. He looked out at the massive audience. Their faces glowing with excitement, some people wiping away tears, others shouting his name, Marco, Marco. The 12-year-old boy stood there trembling, his small frame dwarfed by the enormous AGT stage. The microphone felt suddenly heavy in his hand, almost too heavy to hold. His throat burned from trying not to cry again. He kept blinking, trying to clear his vision. But no matter how hard he tried, the image kept returning. Simon Cowell was standing. It didn't feel real. Back in Manila, Marco had watched AGT episodes on dusty television screens in small sari stores, where people gathered to cool off and escape the heat. He had seen kids cry from nerves. He had seen Simon frown, criticize, shake his head. He had seen him smile only rarely, like when someone truly special appeared. Marco never imagined he would be one of those people. He never imagined Simon Cowell would stand up. For him, the roar of the audience grew louder as Simon stepped away from the judge's table. The other judges turned to watch him, surprised. Even Heidi raised her eyebrows, sensing something extraordinary was about to unfold. Simon walked slowly toward the center of the judges' panel, keeping his eyes locked on Marco. His steps were measured, almost dramatic, a man walking with absolute certainty. Marco's mother felt her legs weaken backstage. She clutched her husband's arm, whispering, Dios co, oh my God, is this real? Lito, Marco's father, swallowed hard, unable to speak. Tears formed in his eyes, tears he had spent years hiding from Marco. But now, watching his son stand on one of the biggest stages in the world, those tears came freely. Up on stage, Marco stood like a statue, unable to move, unable to breathe. Simon took a deep breath, lifted his microphone, and spoke, his voice firm but gentler than anyone expected. Marco, he said. The boy looked up, wide-eyed, as if hearing his name for the first time. Simon continued, You know, I've judged this show for a long time and I've seen thousands of singers, but every once in a while someone walks out here, someone small, someone humble, And they remind me why I love music in the first place. The audience grew quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to pause their movements. Simon's voice softened. That performance wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. Marco blinked rapidly, his tears threatening to spill. It was honest, Simon continued. It came from deep inside you. From your life, your struggles, your heart. That is what makes an artist. Marco's breath trembled. His lips quivered. He felt his hands shaking again, not from fear this time, but from disbelief. Then Simon did something unexpected. He stepped closer to the golden buzzer, so close that Marco knew, he knew, something impossible was about to happen. The crowd began screaming, as if they sensed it too. "No way!" Someone shouted. "He's gonna do it!" Another voice yelled, "Oh my God!" A woman gasped. Even Marco, who had never experienced anything like this in his life, felt it. That strange electric feeling in the air, the kind that only came before something magical. Simon turned back to Marco one last time. "You, young man," he said with a small smile, "are exactly why we made this show. You deserve the world to hear your voice." Marco covered his mouth with both hands. His knees buckled. His eyes overflowed with tears. And then, Simon slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. Boom! The sound was deafening. Like fireworks erupting inside the theater, a burst of golden light exploded from the buzzer, and suddenly glittering confetti rained down like 1,000 tiny stars. The entire stage glowed with warm yellow light, making Marco look like he was standing in a bee. Of sunshine sent from heaven. The audience erupted into screams. Some people jumped out of their seats. Others cried openly. The judges stood and clapped, watching the moment unfold with awe. Backstage, Marco's mother collapsed into tears, crying out, "Anak! Anak!" Lito rushed forward, holding her as they watched their son being showered in gold. On stage, Marco fell to his knees. Confetti stuck to his hair, his eyelashes, his cheeks. He didn't even bother wiping it off. He cried openly, shoulders shaking, unable to believe that the dream he never dared to imagine was happening, to him. A moment later, his mother ran onto the stage, tears streaming down her face. She knelt beside him, wrapping him in a tight embrace. Marco sobbed into her shoulder, clutching her like a lifeline. "You did it!" she cried, voice breaking. "Anak, you did it!" His father joined them, lifting Marco into his arms in one sweeping motion. For the first time in years, Lito cried without hiding. Not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from overwhelming pride. Simon walked onto the stage and stood before them. He placed a gentle hand on Marco's back. "Your life changes today," Simon said quietly. "And you earned it." Marco looked up at him with pure gratitude. No words, just emotion. The golden confetti kept falling, shimmering under the bright stage lights. The audience continued cheering. The judges continued smiling. In that moment, Marco wasn't a poor boy from the streets of Manila. He wasn't T the kid with torn slippers, or the voice echoing through small alleys. He was a star, a boy who came from nothing, shining in gold. And as the confetti fell like blessings from the sky, Marco realized something he had never dared to believe. His voice was enough. His dream was real, and his story was just beginning.